Yep.
Okay.
If you think of it somewhere, let's see the abstract.
Yeah,
Can we mark this?
yeah, no, for sure.
Change from the Andrea and I way in the back. No.
Thanks for also giving us this time.
Oh, of course. Special treat.
This is usually
It's used, of course. We've dedicated all lab and autism-related meetings to me and Gunnar this week.
Oh, it's so nice. Thank you.
It's an upgrade.
I also managed to stare down our previous speakers.
That's always tough.
Well, it took coming in and.
He was on his thank you slide though.
Thank you, slide.
Yeah, I didn't on that for
Now, for us, I don't mind as long as you want to linger on the thank you slide. It's totally fine. But if they're the previous hour. Yeah, no, I have to get it. I think we have a few people transitioning. I'll give it one more minute.
That's fine. My talk is.
Gonna weigh you down. 5 seconds. It's a big difference. Over 26 months of trip is it's a whole career.
No, so it's just like but
Oh, I would not want to know that. I would not want to know that. I think that would give me so much anxiety. Yeah.
Well, let's get started. Thanks everyone for coming on Friday morning. Another beautiful day. Megan, you brought such beautiful weather. Steve brought such beautiful weather. Thank you, Steve. So for those of you that have been with us during the week, and it looks like many of you have, as you know, this is our third Gesell Lecture with Dr. Megan Gunnar as our Gesell Lecturer. I'm going to do just a much briefer introduction. That's fine. That's a whole other discussion. We're just really, really pleased, Megan, to have had you spend the week with us. We've had a really very full and productive week. I think that Arnold Gesell would have actually been quite excited to have been in these discussions. For those of you who haven't been to the previous lectures, just to remind you that Dr. Gesell was the first director of the Child Study Center, starting in 1911. And Dr. Gesell's work was really about mapping the ontogeny of early behavioral development in infants. And many of the developmental scales and schedules that we still use actually have Gesell roots. And indeed, probably some of the early standardization samples are probably older adults now here in New Haven because they were all the children of Yale faculty. But one of the reasons that we wanted to have this lecture and to start this Gesell Lecture series his notions about development, about the unfolding of life and ontogeny, on how we think about development, is really a part of the modern discourse. When you hear people talk about, well, they just are acting like a 4-year-old, those are really fundamental, popularized ideas of development, but the idea of unfolding is something that's a part of the humanities as well as our science, and much has moved considerably forward about the science of early child development. So that's why to have this lecture series and to try to get us all together and to continue those cross-disciplinary dialogues. Last year, Dr. Steve Sumi, sitting on the front, was our first Gesell Lecturer. This year, we're honored to have Dr. Megan Gunner from Minnesota as our second lecturer. And as we've been saying, we're like this tradition of each lecturer coming back with the subsequent one. Again, many of you have already been here, but let me just remind you that Dr. Gunner is a Regents Professor and the Distinguished McKnight University Professor of Child Development at the Institute of Child Development at the University of Minnesota. As you've heard throughout the week, Dr. Gunner's work focuses very much on the impact of stress and early adversity on long-term outcome, with a particular focus on the HPA axis, and also interest in adoption samples, again, how we think about adversity. Those kinds of questions are absolutely key to many of us at the Child Study Center, to what we do with the families we see. As I've said on other times and can't say enough, Dr. Gunner's also, as you will, I hope, get a sense of, is very devoted to children and families and how we take our science and bring it out into effective treatments, and how we really inform policy in a much more direct and effective way, giving us, all of us, the responsibility to take what we do in the labs and bring it out to help children and families. So Megan, it's been such a pleasure having you with us, and we really thank you for doing this. And here is the third lecture for you.
Yes, and after this, I'll have no brains. Thank you. For those of you who have been in the first 2 lectures, those focused on the effects of early adversity on children's development when we remove them from adversity into some of the best conditions that the world has to offer. This is about normative development. So my first love actually was figuring out normative developmental processes, because as every good developmental psychopathologist knows, you can't understand what is atypical if you don't understand what's typical in development. So here we're focusing in this one predominantly on normative development. There will be pieces, if you've been to both others, you'll say, oh, I saw that slide 2 days ago, or there'll be pieces from the other talks, but this is a focus on normative development. We know that social relationships are important for the regulation of stress. We've known this for a long time. We know it in the animal literature, in the adult literature, and in the human development literature as well. Relationships are particularly critical regulators of stress for children, especially when they're too young to be able to manage stressors on their own, right? And not just parent-child relationships, but many relationships in children's lives. The problem and the challenge with stress is that it is a two-headed figure. It can be both the most important component of buffering you from stress and the greatest source of your stress. I'm going to focus on social buffering side of it today, not the social cause of stress side of it, but both are equally important to understand. And as you've heard all week, I love the HPA axis, and I spend a lot of time trying to understand what regulates this axis, and relationships are really critical for regulating this axis. I've also said in earlier lectures that part of the reason that I study the HPA axis, because I'm a developmentalist, is that it's a very powerful steroid hormone, that it's a gene transcription factor, that it influences the development of the brain, and it influences particularly regions that are involved in memory and emotion and self-regulation. And these are things that if you're interested in developmental psychopathology, you're interested in these kinds of regions of the brain that are involved in these things. So that's sort of the background. Now, for you young people, you're going to actually see the whole course of my career because this whole story starts early in my career when I got to Minnesota, and my first challenge was to begin to understand how did the system function in typically developing human children. We really didn't know much about it. We knew in the animal literature that there was this period of stress hyporesponsiveness after birth when the adrenal really didn't respond to much of anything, and that it was really a very immature structure. Ratties are born like third trimester human development. I mean, birth is not the same point in development in these two species. So I had to figure this out. And at that time, we didn't have salivary cortisol measures. We knew they were on the horizon. They were being developed, but they were not readily available, so I was stuck with blood. And if I was stuck with blood and I wanted to study typically developing kids, where do you go? You go to the hospital nursery because they're taking blood heel sticks to check for metabolic disorder on all the kids. And you hire a nurse to be your research assistant, and she takes the blood and then takes some extra things, and you organize when that blood is taken. And so we had studies where we took it after the kids have been asleep for a while, after we did a little discharge exam on them, after we did the Brazelton exam on them, which many of you know, after we did a heel stick, so a second heel stick, and then circumcision. I wanted to see if the adrenal would respond, and I wanted to stress her that if it didn't respond, I would believe it wasn't responding. And circumcision seemed like a very God, they're not responding to circumcision without anesthesia. The adrenal's not responsive. I walked right into the middle of infant pain. I didn't realize that. No, they don't feel pain. Well, yeah, okay. So with anesthesia, without anesthesia, and by doctors just learning how to do. So you can see not only does it respond, but if you organize it by the stimulus, it's a very sensitive system at birth. And it's showing graded kinds of responses. So then the question became, well, does it stay responsive? Now here I got liberated, I think that's right. I got liberated from the newborn nursery because the salivary assays were now available. So I could move out and leave the newborn period. I did some nice studies on newborns, but I could leave the newborn period. But I had decided that I love doctors because they do to babies what I can't do to babies. And so I started, we did a study where we followed kids as they went to their well baby exams, to their 2, 4, and 6 months in the group that I was working with, and then their next shots were at 15 months. Now you know how, if you, any pediatricians here? Yeah, you don't practice pediatrics anymore though, do you? That was so long ago, right? Now you don't just get one set of shots in the second year, you get shots at 12 months, 15 months, 18 months, you get multiple, you get shots up the kazoo in the second year of life. But this was then. And what we found fascinating, and this is delta, salivary cortisol, 2 months, this looks very much like a newborn response, because I have salivary data on newborns as well. And then you saw this drop here at 4 and 6 months. We have some evidence that this is probably due to the pituitary developing and becoming more mature. Okay, so you see this drop, and then you're not seeing a response on average in that second year. And if you follow, this is a schematic of crying. If you follow crying, yeah, they stop crying a little faster, but man, they start crying when the nurse is coming for them, right, in the second year. So this is not like, oh, I love shots, because I'm, 15 months of age. And we began to wonder if this period of time, is that what I have in here? Yes. If this period of time might be beginning to show us the power of social buffering. And why did I think that? Well, this is 6 months, that's 15 months, and something important happens between 6 and 15 months, and children begin to organize their security seeking around one or a few people. We call that a certain period, that's the onset of very specific attachment. So is this reflecting the power of that relationship to begin to buffer the HPA axis? Or is another way of putting it, does the parent move into the hypothalamus sometime in this period of time? Now, the challenge, let me make sure that's where I'm going, yes. The challenge of asking that question is, what you might want to do is have something happen to the kid with or without the parent present. But if I take the parent away, what have I done? I've produced a massive stressor, right? So I can't study it that way. So the next best thing is to read Bowlby. And begin to think about the fact that even Bowlby was talking about the security of that relationship as being a degree of a buffer. that the parent was providing. So instead of taking the parent away, we kept the parent there, but we analyzed the quality of the attachment relationship. And you can see how old this is. Some of you may know this person. Her name is Kristen Buss. Do you know Kristen? That was when she was an undergraduate in my lab. Okay, she's now a professor at Penn State. So we did Ainsworth's strange situation to assess attachment. And then on a different week, bringing them in through a different door, trying to confuse them, we put them through their PACEs. So that's the attachment security. Oh, never mind, I don't know where I'm going. Okay, if you do the attachment test, that's the issue of sensitive history of responsive care as part of that. We went back and we looked at our data from the physical exams and shots, and we had scored the parents in terms of their behavior. And most of the parents during a physical exam time when your kid's getting a shot look pretty responsive. So we sort of had average to responsive parents. Then we did have some low responsive parents. Some of these were parents that left the room during the shot because they didn't want the kid to associate the shot with them. Right, just when I need you, you're out of here. And when we looked at, this is standard units now that I've converted this to, when we looked at the change in cortisol over time, if I put together the responsiveness in the 2, 4, and 6 month exam, and so I could group them, the low responsive kids actually have pretty low cortisol, but then by the time they're at 15 months, they're not being buffered. And the ones from high responsive parents are actually showing this increasing buffering over time. And this does predict attachment classification when the kids are 18 months. Okay. Now, I also wanted to get out of the clinic and try to manipulate the children's fearfulness and anxiety. And one of the best ways to do that is to identify things that are spontaneously scary to kids, right? Santa is one of them. And you're seeing a beautiful example of buffering here. The only way this little girl was going to get the picture on Santa's lap is if mommy sat on Santa's lap too, right? But if you look at her face, she has not changed her opinion of Santa, right? She still thinks he's terrifying, but she is able to handle it because she's on mom's lap. So we decided we would take a page from that and scare them with the other thing that's the most frightening to children. And this study was done with kids who were 18 months of age. We brought them, this is where we had them do the strange situation assessment, and then on another week bringing them in through a different door to a different room. So they hopefully were dissociating that, although we did have the strange cotton rolls that were there every time. We did a scary events task. So we had them either with puppets that popped out of the wall and said, "Hi, I'm Norf Norf, I'm Nif Nif, come over, get the ball that's in that bucket down there and play with us." And the kids start on the mom's lap. And as this child is showing, I'm not so sure about that. And we just let whatever would happen for 3 minutes. Told the mothers to be relatively quiet. Then we let the moms do what they would want to do to help their kid feel comfortable. And we went on to the next thing. So we had the puppets. We had a clown robot that, went around and made whoop whoop, and smoke came out and all the rest of that. And then we had the live clown that came in and asked if the child would want to play. And what we saw, we scored the kids' fearfulness. This is, it was of course a continuum. This is broken in by the median. We had some kids who were very bold, right? "Oh, these are great things. I'm off. I'm playing with you." And some that were frightened by these things, right? And if we looked at the response over the test as a function of attachment security, if I'm not frightened of the thing, it doesn't matter, right? It shouldn't matter. I'm not stressed. If I am frightened, however, and I'm securely attached, I'm not responding. This is 0. If I'm not, I'm activating my HPA axis. So this is so both studies there suggest to me, right, that the security of that relationship is providing a very powerful buffer. It's providing a buffer when I go to the doctor and they jab me in the leg with gigantic needles, so pain. It's providing a buffer when crazy people, confront me with crazy puppets and clowns and so forth. But these are, so how far does this extend? And there I got a chance, a number of years later. Lila Honert is a developmental psychologist. She was trained and worked in East Germany. And after the wall came down, the East Germans had to be sort of retooled. Michael Lamb brought her to the National Institute of Health to help retool her. And she's an attachment person. She was doing, with Michael Lamb, she did a very interesting study in Berlin and of the role of attachment relationship in predicting how kids adapted to childcare. Now, in Berlin at the time that this was done, you had fabulous parental leave policies. So women stayed home with their baby. Of course, it wasn't the dads. It wasn't completely fabulous. Women stayed home with the kids for the first year. So you didn't go to daycare until you were in your second year. And then beautiful daycare set up so that you knew which daycare you could go to. It was government run, it was high quality, and the way they wanted you to do daycare is you would bring your child for 2 or 3 or 4 days or a week and help your child adapt to this before you'd leave them for the first time. And Lilo was able to do attachment classifications before children started daycare. Okay, so she had all sorts of other kind of data, but she had all this cortisol data, and she needed help with it. So Lilo came and spent a semester in my lab. We had a load of fun, and we analyzed her data, and this gave me a really real-world context. Well, so did the shots, but a really real-world context. So this is what we saw. This is salivary cortisol at home early in the morning on a day before you start daycare. Okay. I've divided it here by secure and insecure kids. You're the first day that your mom takes you to this really arousing place with all these kids, right? I mean, it's wow, and I'm a toddler now. This isn't a significant increase, but for some kids it was. Here's the insecure kids. Now, I do not know what the parents were doing. I wish I knew, because I can envision that the moms of secure kids are sitting there watching them being available, and the moms of insecure kids are chatting with the other moms. And I mean, I don't know what they're actually physically doing at the time, but I know that they're not buffering. Or it could be worse, right? But they're not buffering. Now, parents did differing numbers of days, so this is the first day and the last day of mom being with you to help you adapt. Anybody want to predict what happens after mom leaves? Oh, you don't. Never mind. You got the T's, you got the answer right there. So now mom leaves. So you have not internalized parental buffering as a toddler. Once she's gone, you're reacting, right? In fact, you're showing levels that are the same as the insecure kids. And this is the first day, the 5th day, the 9th day. Okay, everybody guilty now. Remember, these kids had never been in childcare before. And this is the 5th month. Okay, so you're beginning to adapt here. But this is the period that is that social buffering. It's showing you the power of the parent being there to be able to buffer this HPA axis. So I did all of this. This was published in 2004. And okay, I had my answer. And I was off doing the effects of daycare on kids, which they rise across the day, blah, 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 blah. We were off doing all of that kind of stuff. And then about 4 years ago, we started to wonder, how long does this last, right? And what might the mechanisms be? Now, in the adult studies, they've also a lot of interest in social buffering in adult work. Naomi Eisenberger, if you've not read her work, it's absolutely fascinating. She brings UCLA students in and has them identify a figure that is their social support figure. Then she puts them in the scanner and threatens them with aversive stimuli. And while they're watching their social support figure, you see reduction in activity in regions that are associated with pain and an increase in the medial PFC connectivity with the amygdala, so you're regulating stress. Beautiful. Jim Cohen, if you don't know his work and you're interested in this, it's absolutely lovely. He has a different model where you're in the scanner, you're going to be shocked on your little foot, these are not children, these are adults. And you're holding the hand of your spouse or a stranger, and beautiful evidence that you changed response to threat in the dorsal prefrontal cortex and the ventrolateral PFC, the dorsal anterior cingulate, and other areas that are associated with threat processing and pain, and also possibly also in the hypothalamus, because you see less activation there. And how much that effect you see depends on the quality of the relationship. So really pretty stuff in adults. It's certainly happening in adults. So maybe it just keeps happening. Your parent works for you forever, and then you switch to your spouse, and it's all beautiful, right? In terms of mechanism, there's also beautiful work by Regina Sullivan looking at little ratties, and looking at where they see, having them be threatened or have shocks. And if you are experiencing that with the mother, you see a flattening of the norepinephrine response, and without the mother, you're seeing the response is in the hypothalamus. So the real possibilities, we certainly start out with it being hypothalamic, and ultimately it's very prefrontal, and you're regulating the whole threat system by the presence of these relationship partners, and it works better when these are people that you trust and feel safe and secure with. Okay, so how long? We certainly got evidence in infancy and early childhood. We got evidence in adulthood. What happens in middle childhood? And for this, I'm moving to the Trier social stress test, which I've talked about before, but now I'll give you a real sort of more careful description of this test. The way this test works is you have a baseline phase of 20 to 30 to 60 minutes to try to get the individual down to real baseline. Then they go and they need to prepare their test, and they prepare it in one room, they're going to give it in another. And they have 5 minutes to prep their speech. And you say, okay, you've got 4 minutes, you got 3 minutes, you got 2 minutes, okay? Then they go into another room, and they are confronted, depends on how you run it. Usually they're confronted by 2 judges. There's a camera on them. They know they're going to be judged, and they're going to be filmed and judged by their peers. And they're speaking through a microphone, and they're giving this speech. And they give what they prepared for 5 minutes. If they stop, this is what you did with kids. You said, could you tell me more? Please tell me more. Right? With adults, they're actually trying to apply for a job. And these guys are actually, well, tell us about the time, have you ever stolen anything? I mean, they ramp it up for the adults. Then you do this math out loud, and you start from a high number, and you subtract by, if you're an adult, you subtract by 7. And if you make a mistake, they say wrong, start over. Okay? While being fair. This is a beautiful way to activate the HPA axis. Then you go and you have 10 minutes, periods of recovery where you're being sampled, and you look at the recovery here. You reach peak cortisol about here, and that's because the HPA axis, you produce and it goes to the adrenal, and it has to cook up and produce the cortisol, and so on. So, and that 25 minutes to peak is time from somewhere in prep. So preparation's when you really start, you know this, you're getting ready to give a talk. You're sitting in the room, somebody else is finishing their talk, and your heart is already going, right? If not, you're gonna get up and give a terrible talk, because your heart will start when you stand up. And that's not the right time to get shaky. Okay, so that's the Trier social stress test. Now, what my friend Seth Pollack did, beating me to the punch, he decided that during this period of time, recovery, he would expose 7 to 12-year-old girls to different conditions. Either when you leave this and you go into recovery, you go and sit with your mom and you have full access to your mom. Or you go to a room where you're allowed to call your mother on the phone. Or you just have an experimenter around. And what he saw during that recovery period was, this was a very pretty response to the Trier when you're alone. This is when you get to call your mommy. And this is when you're with your mommy. So this is the recovery phase. So this bothers me. Like, did they know they were going to be with their mom? But he found an effect of being with the mom or being able to call the mom. They were interested actually in oxytocin. So they measured urinary oxytocin, and they found slightly different pattern, but that's probably because of the timing. You can only measure before and then way after, that it really looked like they were getting a really pretty effect of increased oxytocin with contact with the mother. Oxytocin interacts with the HPA axis. It actually can dampen the axis at the level, I believe, of the pituitary, so it doesn't even have to get in the brain. Oxytocin is also an anti-stress hormone, so you know all about the bonding stuff in the brain, but it also is really good for your cardiovascular system. And so it's a cardiovascularly protective activation. So very nice findings there. Maybe part of how social buffering works, or it may also be part of how social buffering allows you to remain healthy for longer. Okay, looks like middle childhood might work, but of course we don't know about boys because he only had girls in his study. And what about adolescence? So what we did, going back to our friendly true social stress test, we took a page from Clemens Kirschbaum's work. Now Clemens, the way they had been doing it in Germany, and this is with adults, is you would come with your significant other, and during this baseline and the 5 minutes of prep, you would be with them. And they would potentially help you prepare to give your speech. Okay? What Clemens found was that if you were a guy and you came with your female partner, it worked slick and you were really reduced stress. I think I told this. So if you're a woman and you came with your male partner, it elevated it. In a later study, they found that if they had the guy just rub the woman's neck, it worked slick. So you figure out what the dynamics are. But we took a page from this and said, okay, if we're going to look at buffering, I want to see if I actually can protect you from activating, not just help you recover more quickly. So here what we did is we had 9 and 10-year-olds and 15 and 16-year-olds. This was Cam Hostenar's research and Anna Johnson's. And they either prepared with their mothers or they prepared with the experimenter, who was, being nice to them, but it wasn't their mother. And what we found for the 9 and 10-year-olds, I showed this the other day because I showed it in comparison to internationally adopted kids, but it was pretty profound when I saw it. So these are the 9 and 10-year-olds who are preparing with the stranger. These are the ones who prepared with the mom. Now she goes away. She goes to a waiting room. She's not watching them give their speech. She's nowhere around when they go through the part of it. It's just there for the prep. And you've just completely blocked the response. It's really pretty. What about 15 and 16-year-olds? No. First of all, you see what we expect, which is an increase basically in HPA axis activity, and absolutely no difference here between stranger and parent. And it's not that the kids are saying, oh, I don't love my parent, or I don't feel safe with my parent. There's no real age difference in reports of that. There's age differences in I have more conflict with my parent if I'm 15 or 16 years of age. So these were normal children. But the network of relationship kinds of things wasn't really making a strong difference here. So the question that we had, let's make sure it's a question, yes. So we had a wonderful time in my lab arguing about, so what is the mechanism here? Why is this happening? And my students absolutely adamant that it's because you learn it from peer culture. So friends are in when you're in adolescence, parents are out, right? And you learn this. This is part of peer culture. And if that's true, then this should track age as you're moving into junior high and the peer relationships are changing and the culture's changing. I, on the other hand, thought, I bet it's puberty. I bet this is an evolutionary thing, guys, and the mechanism isn't junior high school, which wasn't around back then. Puberty. So we had a little bet, that puberty or age. And the way to be able to do this is to focus on kids who are in this transition period. I love 11 to 14-year-olds for this reason. These kids are all 12 and 13, actually. That one and that one are the same age. So what you can do is when you constrain to this period of time, It's part of why middle school was so awful. You're constrained to this period of time. You can call people on the phone, work with their parents, ask them 2 or 3 or 4 puberty-related questions. And you can identify the ones that are probably further along and earlier in puberty, right? And you can try to fill cells so that you're balancing as much as possible puberty and age. Because otherwise, they're going to be correlated, and you can't put them both in the same analysis. But if you could unhook them, and if you keep it a constrained age, you're not really getting hyper-early puberty, which is an issue, or hyper-late puberty. You're just getting that normative variation and controlling it, and that's what we did. So the kids in the study actually were 11 to 14. Were they 11 to 14? Yeah, they were 11 to 14 in the study. And this was done by Jenna Doom and Cam Hostenar, and a woman by the name of Adrienne Benzoma and Don. Okay, we pitted age against puberty. I won. It was puberty. So if you look there, these are the kids controlling for our age is the same, who were pre and early puberty. We analyzed it continuously, but to show it to you, these are the guys who were stages 1 and 2 in puberty. And what you can see is it just looks like what I showed you with the 9 and 10-year-olds. So here it is with the stranger, there you are with your mother. Okay? Oh, you are supposed to, I need to get out of this. Somehow this stupid thing. Hello, how do I get out of this? End show. End show, thank you. Where were we? We were here. Take away, go away, get out of here. Thank you very much. Go back to show, slideshow. Current slide. Ta-da! Okay, so those that were further along in puberty were not showing any difference. They didn't show as much of a higher increase in the study, but nature always has tricks up her sleeve for me. So it looked like puberty was probably the switch, and not particularly age, though age may contribute to other things. We have, Amy Arnston's not here, right? I put this in just for Amy. We've also looked at alpha amylase, which is an indirect measure of autonomic activity, and did that in this study. No puberty, no parental. I mean, you need, if you're going to get up and give a speech, you have to increase your autonomic nervous system activity. And it wasn't different, so it was cortisol that was differentiating. If I had pre-ejection period, a really good measure of sympathetic adrenomedullary activity, dumping of epinephrine, not necessarily, I might see it. But the easier measure of alpha amylase didn't show it to me. So if it's not the parents, who? So I'm moving into adolescence. I'm moving into that horrible middle school period. As I go through puberty, having my parent with me, at least supporting me in a social evaluative stressor context, which is what so much a threat in adolescence has to do with being evaluated, right? You care more about evaluated, a lot of stress in adolescence is around. So somehow being able to take that to my parent or have my parent supporting me isn't providing the buffer that I need at that time at least for the HPA axis. Is there any solace out there? Again, my students and I are arguing. And my students say, remember, friends are in. So friends will become your buffer. You will shift to friends who will become your buffer. And I say, okay, this is an empirical question. We don't need to argue. We just need to run a study. And this was the work that was Jenna Doom's dissertation. And it was based in part by looking at some work that was done by Mitch Pristine, if you know Mitch at all. He also used a public speaking task, a version of the Trier. He had them recover with a friend. And the friend was supposed to ask them a set of questions about their experiences. And he had all sorts of information about the quality of that relationship. The positive qualities of the relationship didn't matter. What he found was that the more negative relationships made it harder to recover. If you were recovering with someone, you had more negative relationships. This could be an evidence of buffering, the low negative relationships, but it might just be what normal recovery looks like. We don't have a no person there, so I don't know. But that made my students really happy. They're like, yes, it's gonna be friends. Okay. So we used our paradigm, the derivation from Clemens Kirschbaum, and had them, yes, there we are, and had them prepare either with their mother, with the best friend, or we didn't have a no, I mean, it was a complicated study to run. By the way, these were done without any NIH support. They were done big sales car washes, that kind of thing. But what I decided, I said, what we've got to do is you cannot come to the laboratory with just your mother if you're in the mother condition, but come with a best friend and your mother if you're in the best friend condition. So you're going to have to bring a best friend anyway. So now this is a different paradigm. I'm coming to the research laboratory as a kid. I'm 9 and 10 or 15 and 16. I'm coming with my mother or my primary caregiver and my best friend. And then a researcher says, right before I go in to prepare, you're going to prepare with your mom or your best friend. So I learn at that point. And then when I come back, I'm sitting with my mother and my best friend. So the only difference is that little 5 minutes, right? Okay, and I got my best friend around this whole time. And it's a social evaluative stressor, remember? Okay, what we saw for the 9 and 10-year-olds looked a little different, but again, it's a very different paradigm. And there was really no significant difference here between parent and best friend. What we saw for the 15, 16-year-olds was that you were a little higher than you were as a kid if you were with your mom, but boy, having your best friend and preparing with that best friend really activated the axis. Why? Well, you're preparing to give a speech. Your best friend is helping you. That really, we think, ramps up the social evaluation nature of the speech. But what does that mean when kids are out and about in school? You know, you have all these social, and you're talking it over with your best friend. Is it helping or is it amplifying or not helping? Is there this period of time, 12, 13, 14, 15, before you, in middle schoolish time, when you really are sort of bereft of powerful stress hormone regulating buffers? That's something I'm really interested in, the possibility that might exist. And that it takes a while before you form the intimate, trusting relationships that will allow you to, at least as a guide, to be able to use your spouse for very powerful social support. In this study, we also wanted to take a look at oxytocin. And this is urinary oxytocin. And what we found was that overall, this is your oxytocin levels if you were with your mom. And these are if you were with your friend. So your friend is not really galvanizing the activation of oxytocin. This is a little spurious. This is really, boys carry this effect. Girls with friends are higher. Okay, boys with friends drop oxytocin like a rock. And you wonder what's going on. Is there a competitive thing beginning to happen in there that's influencing the oxytocin? But the oxytocin really verifies what we were seeing with the friends and the HPA axis. Okay, so we're not the only ones interested in this question, and I already told you about folks that with adults, Naomi Eisenberger and Jim Cohen, who have been interested in brain activity, but that's also happening with kids, and you know about it here because Dylan Gee produced one of the really fabulous papers on this with Nim Tottenham, where she was able to show that the connectivity between the amygdala and the medial prefrontal cortex, which helps you with regulation, increases in the presence of you're viewing a picture of your mom versus stranger if you're a kid. But in adolescence, the parents present doesn't have that emotion regulatory ramp-up effect. Nim Tottenham also did some reanalysis of work that was done by Tony Jovanovich, where the kids needed to differentiate periods of threat and periods of safety in a potentiated startle paradigm. And either their mother was in the next room and they could see her, or she was down the hall and they couldn't see her. It wasn't designed to be this way, it just ended up that way, and they looked at it. And what they saw is that the kids who could see their mothers, not the adolescents didn't need to see their mothers, but the kids that could see their mothers learned to differentiate safety better from threat. Whereas the kids who didn't see their mother they reacted with as much startle in the safe periods and the danger periods. Does it make sense? So there's other work suggesting that, yes, as a kid, This is a really powerful buffering system. As you move into adolescence, you become more independent. Thank God. And you begin to rely probably more on your own resources. But there may be a period of time, and this is when you don't have that capacity to use friends and relation and in the same powerful way. That's what we need to understand. Now, this I did show those of you who were one of the earlier talks, because we also ask if you lack a consistent attachment figure early, are you able to then form an attachment that then is able to be a powerful regulator of your HPA axis? And I'm looking at kids who get adopted by typically 2 to 3 years of age. So they're adopted young, and I'm looking at them multiple years after they've been adopted. This is work, of course. Seth Pollack beat me to the punch on this as well. But Seth was interested in whether urinary oxytocin would increase if you were physically in contact with your parent, if you were a kid who came out of an orphanage. And the study that he did with Fries and Bertie Shirtcliffe, they designed this really cool paradigm. The kids are 5 and 6 years of age. They come into the laboratory. There's a computerized game. They sit on their parent or a stranger's lap, and it's counterbalanced, so they do both, to play this game. And this game is a social interaction game. So the game says, touch the nose, and they turn around and touch the nose, or play pat a cake, that kind. So you're controlling how much social interaction. And then they look at urinary oxytocin response. And if you are born and raised in your family of origin, sitting on your mom's lap when you're 5 and 6, playing this interactive contact game, your oxytocin elevates. You don't do it with a stranger. You don't see that with the kids who have come from orphanages. So they're not getting that biological bang for their buck of being able to be with this person. And we also included them in that study that I showed you. And to see if being with your mother while you prep for your speech would give you that biological bang for your buck. And as I showed you a few days ago, what we're seeing here, these are my non-adopted kids, these are my post-institutionalized kids, when they are able to be with their mother and they're getting no bang for their buck. These are actually, yes, these are the non-adopted kids. And these are the post-institutionalized kids with a stranger, and that's not different. So even years and years after being adopted, and often forming very good relationships, you're just not getting the same biological bang for the buck. Like you're attached up here, but the process isn't embedded in your hypothalamus and your other regions of the brain. And there I showed you there might be a little sensitive period that if you get there by about 1.5 years, you might be able to have some of that. So I got done even earlier because I'm running out of material, guys. Talk 4 would be really short. As to summarize, your attachment figure, your parents, provide powerful buffers of neuroendocrine stress responses and probably regulators of other biological systems as you form that discriminating attachment. With puberty, parents seem to lose some of their potency as stress buffers. That doesn't mean you don't gain a lot from being able to go home, talk to your parent, to know that security, but it may be that you're still regulating your biological systems more on your own. Okay. With social evaluative stressors, at least peers may even amplify the stress response. Oxytocin might play a role. This is really an interesting possibility. And at least we can think of it as an anti-stress hormone that's important to be regulated so that your physiology, you don't have cardiovascular disease. And the quality of that attachment matters. However, as does the opportunity to form a secure relationship during infancy. And millions of people have helped with this research. And we have time to answer questions. If you have any left. Yeah.
So great talk, of course. I'm curious about the oxytocin data in the adopted children, the ones you just showed.
Yep.
And I'm curious, how specific is that effect to that relationship in that context? And are there contexts or relationships in which the adopted kids show normative oxytocin responses? Mm-hmm. In other words, do you think it's about the relationship with the parent, or is it a decimated oxytocin system?
I think I don't know the answer because there hasn't been that much done and call Seth Pollock and see what he thinks. But my suspicion is that it's more about the relationships. It's more about being able to regulate it in the same way with relationships. However, it would be really, we really would need to know. And we don't know whether there's times when that can get reoriented. This big suspicion would be you're pregnant, you have a baby, you breastfeed, and you get into your oxytocin system in a different way. But it may, if our friends, the voles, and if Larry Young stuff with the mice is right, it isn't so much about producing oxytocin as where those receptors are, right? And you know that story, right? So do you have receptors for this in the nucleus accumbens where it's going to be part of the reward system or not so much? So I don't know.
And can I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah.
Are similar effects seen, do you know, in adopted children with adoptive parents who don't have kind of a history of neglect?
No one, look, hello, you're just writing the research grant for these young people. There's so much wide open stuff. So much of this, well, you'd have to ask Ruth Feldman too, but so much of the stuff with oxytocin is, as you know, it's around the issues of kids with ASD, and much less going on, except for Ruth's work that I know of, really asking these kind of normative questions, right, of what influences the organization development of the system, and how does it vary with the early experiences. I think there's a lot to be asked. Yeah.
Just a technical question. When was the urinary oxytocin collected relative to this?
Yeah. It was collected before and 60 minutes after. I mean, you have to do that because you got to clear it through, you have to get it into your, so before, and then you fluid load, and then 60 minutes after the onset of the stressor is, I believe, when we measured it. Your friend and mine in Wisconsin, it was the one who told us when to measure it, who is a really heavy-duty monkey oxytocin person. Yeah, did you have a point?
Because it's not linked time-wise to...
Well, okay. Not in your pee, but it's not the urine, the oxytocin in your pee that's affecting your heart. So it is linked time-wise to when it could affect your heart and the pituitary, but then it has to be cleared from the system, go through the kidneys, and get out. So no, the sampling of it is not, right? But yes, the activation of the system is fast, and it is linked time-wise to when you're...
it's fast.
Yeah, it's a fast-acting system. Yeah.
For the adolescent experiment, the friend that they brought in, was it same gender?
Yes, we kept it the same gender, though, we could have made it just be your best friend, but we didn't want to get into dating relationships, right? So, and we didn't want to get into deciding, is this really a platonic friend or not? Is there such a thing in a heterosexual boy, to have a platonic relationship? I'm not going to try to deal with that. So it's same-sex friend. Yeah.
Just a follow-up to this question. It sounds like integrating many of the data that you presented, that pubescence anticipates, we don't know causal relationships yet, but pubescence anticipates the inability of an adolescent to benefit from parental support. If I've got that right.
Yeah, I think I'd put it a little bit differently. Part of the function of puberty is to help unhook you from your natal home so that you can move on. Okay.
But, okay.
Okay, so it's...
By the time you develop and you're doing the adult work has all been done with heterosexual relationships. So let's keep
Yes, it
that
has been done with
limitation in mind.
heterosexual relationships.
But by the time you reach either very late adolescence or early adulthood or beyond, you are now benefiting from a different source of support.
Yep.
So one way of thinking about adolescence is that pubescence has prepared you for a relationship in which the adolescent phase does not provide adequate support, so that you become biologically ready in some sense
to form
for
another
a sustained heterosexual relationship.
For a sustained romantic relationship.
Right, but either cultural factors or other factors have unhooked a biological system from a
They've made it a
relationship.
very long period of time.
Right.
Right, because typically, we wouldn't have gotten into puberty until 13 or 14, and we would have been in a stable and have, yes,
So
there wouldn't have been that
That would
period.
then set up adolescence as a second sensitive period for trauma.
Oh, yeah, that's what we all, trauma and recovery.
Right.
I mean, you've got the potentially for both things going on, I think. And you weren't here for where my pubertal recalibration stuff, which is if you start out and you organize your systems in a very harsh context, you move into a less harsh context. You don't reorganize, but maybe with puberty, with all of this changing neuroendocrine stuff, you have an opportunity to recalibrate to the harshness of the environment at that time. And all of us think about harshness in terms of relationships, but your biology cares a whole boatload about the level of pathogen exposure. Is there enough food? Am I warm? And so on. So the kids coming out of orphanages are shifting on all levels of the quality of the environment. Yeah.
I'm really curious, along with this kind of differential effect in oxytocin
Yeah.
of the teens with
Yep.
between the boys and girls.
Yeah, I'd love
did
to
you see any
replicate that.
differences in like HPA activity among?
No.
Okay, both in because I would think
I
that
wasn't seeing it in
qualitatively-
HPA activity.
Interesting.
Both, no, not in HPA activity.
And then also, was there any difference in the recovery when they're alongside their friends, or it just looks the same in boys and girls? besides
The
oxytocin?
recovery rate was similar in boys and girls, but remember, they were with their mom and their friend.
Yeah.
Like, they went back and were with them, so I can't answer that clearly, yeah. Well, there's so much more to do, so much more to do. Yep, any more?
Meeting we've had
Yeah,
a lovely
thank you.
time with you. We want to be sure to give you
Oh, I get presents.
so much for
Thank
stopping by.
you.
Well, that's what you're up. And we do hope this is the first of many visits.
Yeah, it'll be fun. It's not a cup. It's nice. Oh, that's nice. And it's got Yale on it. Very nice. Thank you very
There
much.
is one other.
Oh, there's another thing in there too? Oh, there is a cup. Please get a cup.
Thought of you and your.
It's a big cup.
and your morning coffee.
Yes, I love big cups, so that's great. I will use this every day.
Excellent.
Excellent. Thank you so, so much.
so
It's been so fun to be here. So fun.
And we'll be here in case people want.
Yeah, I'll stand around for a while. I managed to get all the chocolate. I gave Steve the chips, and I packed all the chocolate. Yeah, they were great. There you go. Yeah, thank you.
You're collaborating with somebody, or are you going to do a podcast?
That was great.
No, it's funny. I didn't realize how actually derivative was stressful. I was really glad you
Track for you. I'll be tracking you.
Take that for you. It was nice having you here. I need to go buy another pointer. The green is better. I like green. Much, much better. I like green much better.
We'll try it this way.
All right. Yep. Voila.
When were you?
What? Oh, good.
I worked with him for 2 years. Let's see, I stopped last December.
Going to remind me,
Yeah,
the run for the infantry, right.
Right. Yeah, I think I actually met you at ASP last summer.
Oh, good.
Of course.
And
I think I'm not sure.
the,
He would like
you might be on it. They just submitted another paper.
Okay, safe travels to you.
Right. I think we published together. I think you got accepted last November.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, of course. Thank you for another
I
excellent
was on
talk.
that
Oh,
one.
yeah,
I don't
thank
think
you
I'm
very
on
much.
the recent one,
Okay,
but Elizabeth is.
but there'll be more.
Right. Yeah. Well,
Great to see you
it was
again.
good to see you. Maybe I'll see you in the future if I get accepted here at Yale.
Well, good luck.
Thank you.
Good to see you.